Welcome to Fatherhood Dojo. Today I'm talking with Jason Frishman, and we're going to talk about this foundational fatherhood adventures. How a masculine journey can be experienced not just out there, but within the family, and how the hero's journey as a framework can evolve to meet the reality of fatherhood and the deeper needs of human beings. So I'm going to welcome Jason. Please introduce yourself. And I'm going to give you the question up front right away. Well, let's do this. You can land in the space as you introduce yourself. Tell us what's current for you so we can kind of know you today.
Well, absolutely. Well, hello, and I am actually really glad to be here. This is a grounding conversation for me. But I'll do the introductions first. My name is Jason Frishman, and I've been a psychologist and a men's coach for quite some time. But the first thing I always like to share is that I'm a partner and a papa. So I have two sons who are 16 and 13, and a wife named Shauna, and we live in what we're hoping one day to be a homestead in rural Vermont outside of Burlington, which is the northeast of the United States. And, we've gone through, perennial gardens and vegetable gardens and chickens and all sorts of wonderful things there. And as far as I'm concerned, I get to live in Shangri-La. So it is a wonderful, beautiful place to be. And, back to the work life that I do is so intimately connected with my personal life, right? Who I am as a father, I get to share, and who I am as a psychologist and coach as men, really they all inform one another pretty independently or pretty interconnectedly, excuse me. And to show that, I had an argument with my older son a couple days ago, and he even said, he was like, would you tell one of your dads that you work with to talk to their kids this way? And I said, absolutely not. And so
Nice.
much of the work I do is around my own growth and supporting men and fathers. I run a program called Journeymen, where essentially I get to host a virtual inn where men get to come in and drop their shoulders and really get nourished and share stories and allow themselves some training on the journeys of fatherhood, for the journeys of fatherhood.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Love that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And I know you had said to sort of center myself, so I will say
Yeah.
the word that I was trying to find earlier was jet lag. I think I have maybe a little bit of jet lag. We just got back from a long family trip that was both wonderful and, in light of kind of what we're talking about today, it's just so good to be home. And while great grand adventures and family trips and going to new places is epic, my wife and I both had this wonderful sigh of groundedness, and we walked into our home, and so we got back last night, promptly fell asleep early on the couch, and with all of the stresses and struggles, and because vacations and epic adventures also have struggle, with all of that, it feels really good to be getting back into the rhythm thing. So I'm really grateful that we get to talk today, of all
times. Thank you. Well, let me do a similar. I'll center myself to say, life is so full for me right now. I have so many different projects I'm involved in, and at the moment, I love it. I feel at some point it's not sustainable. So a project, I could say, if you'll allow me the word to use project around family, I have the fatherhood role. There's a project nature to it that I get to a point, something's done, and then I have to pick up a new beginning of sorts. So yeah, I'm feeling blessed. There's a lot of work going on in our house, so that's a little oddly destabilizing, but also really exciting because there's nice an environment we're creating around our house that's going to be really beautiful. And other than that, I'm very excited. I know that we've talked before, so there's kind of the geek part of me that's excited to talk to you, and also curious to hear more as we go, how we find depth in sharing our experience and stories. So looking forward to this.
Wonderful. That'd be great.
Yeah. So based on our last conversation, you had said something that was super cool. I want you, if you could just start us off, Jason, with like how you experientially came to understand the distinction between a masculine journey for yourself being not so much out there in the world, but within the family.
Oh yeah. Um, well, as we started talking the last time, I said, I love the hero's journey. I love the epic nature of fantasy and sci-fi and all of these wonderful, great stories. I before I had kids, I hiked the Appalachian Trail. I was an avid outdoors person, and really, I love that, and was really, spent a lot of time. I wrote my dissertation using the metaphor of the hero's journey. I spent a lot of time thinking about growth and development and masculinity through that lens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I had kids, and well, and actually before that, then I gained a partner, and I really, the trials and tribulations of sharing a home and sharing a life and building the connections that are not about seeking outward treasures, but about really sharing and connecting on a powerful level. Um, it wasn't about going off and discovering new treasures. It was about staying home and doing the dishes and wiping dirty butts and cleaning diapers and managing the ins and outs, or not, and the struggles that came with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of the being at home and the struggles, let's say, that my wife and I had as we were navigating this, so much of it came in the metaphor of what masculinity should be
Mm-hmm.
and what I felt it needed to be or didn't, or what I didn't want it to be. Growing up, I was always a little different, and so um yeah, it was a the biggest thing was when my first son was born, and we just like had this moment where I was like, being at home, being at home with my wife, with my son, felt more important than anything else. And yet I struggled, right? Like, I remembered right when my first was born, I had started a psychology practice. I had started a therapy practice. And so I didn't have that many clients. I truly could have been home for more hours than I
Mm-hmm.
was. And yet I felt this drive to build my practice and make more money and do the thing. And while I did that, not consciously aware of the fact that, like, I was doing this because I felt I should and all of that, my wife was at home feeling abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about that. We've worked on that. We've really, we've gone there. But it was a major insight for me that, for me, my treasure, my journey and the challenge, the grand challenge and obstacle, was to be more aware of my own self, the social programming that I had, all of these things, and choose my values and choose the things that I do,
Mm-hmm.
which, for me, has been to be with my kids and be with my wife and be with my family. And while I still have grand designs and grand plans, um, I know who comes first in life. And I don't always do it well, and I don't always do it perfectly, but I know who comes first.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah. Well, so we are, I'll call it out here. I talked to Jason in the beginning about like, let's try something a little different. I didn't prepare a bunch of questions as I have with other conversations in this context. Um, so yeah, where can we take this? I'll give it to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for reminding me. I got very much into sharing that and I stopped. But yeah, what was interesting is, you said earlier, calling fatherhood a project.
Mm,
And I guess I would love to hear a little more about that, because it makes sense. And yet you paused when you said it, right? And so I
yeah.
guess I was curious a little bit about how you use those words and the definitions of how how they connect for you.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because there's a kind of a distaste for saying it as I said it. Um,
Yeah.
so it's both. It's like there's the part of me that likes to understand the beginning and the end of a cycle. And I love, like, I'm so in Chinese astrology, I'm a wood tiger. And that partially means that, like a tiger, I will go, 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 and then I want to sleep, rest. And that could be like I need 2 weeks of nothing, and then I will go like 8 weeks of hard on something, whatever that is.
Mm.
So, as a father, there's multiple ways I can answer this. There's the role I'm playing, how I'm developing my own self. I mean, I don't love the idea of thinking of myself as a project, but I understand as cycles go and change happens, that part resonates. And then the family as a project. There's, we could work on the home, and then we could work on like something to do with school. A school year is a project to me. So I suppose I could distill it to say I like thinking in terms of cycles of change. Yeah.
Mm.
Uh,
And
Yeah.
well, so how does that connect with fatherhood, and in the sense of like, you know, is it breaking it down to the developmental changes of your kids, or I guess I'm just wondering, like, how do you see that then? Because yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you right now, like between this context, Fatherhood Dojo, that's kind of there's a whole project there about creating content that for me satisfies a need around self-understanding and then sharing that self-understanding with others for their benefit. So there's a project there that um, I'm in development as a father, and it feels super slow. And so as I get to notice changes in myself, whether it's like change to me is I don't know what I'm doing wrong because I'm not aware of it. Then I realize what I'm doing that I'm not feeling great about. I feel shame. I
Mm.
feel, let's say, for example, the ways that I get mad at my kids. People will have heard me speak to this before, and it's an ongoing, I'm making incremental changes. Like I feel differently about my anger. That's a huge win to me. I'm a little more comfortable with my anger. It doesn't mean that I want to always go there, but when it happens, I feel less shame and more ability to recover and to go back with love. Like my daughter and I had a huge fight 2 nights ago. The next morning, we were talking about the coolest things in the car on the way to camp. Like it, and I could speak to like, um, I don't always do this, probably some more than not. I will say the way I talked to you yesterday was not okay. I don't always do that because sometimes I feel like, it actually felt appropriate. Even though I was uncomfortable with it, it felt appropriate. So my relationship to anger is a project. Um,
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Hmm.
I want to tie something back because I want to pass this back to you related to our topic. So there's a way in which, so anger for me sometimes shows up in the context of either me being or feeling disrespected by my kids, or and that could be either they kick me, they kick my body with their body, or they misplace something of mine and they have no idea where it is. And this reminds me of something that you had mentioned in an earlier conversation about imps, the archetype of the
Mm.
imp, and how the child can play that archetype. And I want to pass it to you for if the adventure is in the home, what does that have to do with living with kids as an archetype of imps? Or maybe you would say it differently.
Oh, it's great. No, that, and actually, I have said it differently, but I really like the way you framed that. Um, so just to back up a little bit for context, so the imps work that I do is really similar to some of the work that you've talked about, and it's a lot of it is our inner stories and our inner relationship to backstory. So maybe our own childhood parts and things like that. And yet, what you're saying makes so much sense. Like our kids become representative of a lot of our imps, right? Like when you said, I feel disrespected if they lose my stuff, or if they, and yet that has maybe nothing to do with you, really. And so for me, as you're saying that, I really, it's interesting. I think about the things that most often upset me or that I get upset with when it comes to my kids. And they are living, breathing representations of my own inner imps, for sure.
Mhm.
So the
Mhm.
things, I'm thinking now, um, you know, anxiety and worry are not particularly one of my challenges. Usually,
Mhm.
usually it's the other end is that I don't think or plan or make, take care of things well enough.
Mhm.
Um, but both of my sons really struggle with anxiety. And, here I am, I'm a psychotherapist, I'm a coach, I work with anxiety all of the time. And I'm not as often as I would like or whatnot, as helpful, patient, or connected when my kids are feeling anxious. I've gotten
Mhm.
better over the years, but I've also realized that that is more about my own inner stories, and that's the work that I need to do, much more than they have to change in order for
Mhm.
me to feel better.
Yeah.
So yeah, the imp, my imp of impatience is what I've named the
Mhm.
the work that I do with guys. I often have them pick a pattern, an imp, name it, and then they get to know it. And so the imp that I have where I am not as present when my kids are feeling anxious, I call
Mhm.
impatience. And my imp of impatience um, has truly gotten in the way of connecting with them when they feel hesitant or worried or anxious or whatnot, to the point where and my son will roll his eyes if he hears this because he's heard me say the story so often, but when he was younger, he looked at me once and said, I'm sorry I'm not as adventurous as you are,
Mhm.
which broke my heart. Because
Mhm.
that's never the message that in fact, I think he's more so, but
Mhm.
that's never the message I would want to give ever to
Mhm.
anyone I love, especially my kids. And I do think that because he struggles with worry, he's even more adventurous than I am.
Mhm.
And so these interactions are things that I have to be aware of. And like you mentioned, I work on myself, which helps me, but it also helps me be a better dad, and it helps them learn to move into their own. I have two sons, so move into their own masculine identity and self, their own humanhood,
Yeah.
in a way that is um yeah, I think that there's a little bit more freedom there. So as I learn about my own imps, as I recognize where they are, um my older son, who really has struggles with anxiety, on this trip was amazing.
Mhm.
We were running for our flight, and he said, we were still going through customs or whatnot, and he went through first, and he's like, I'll run ahead to the gate and see if I can, stop the plane.
Mhm.
What? Awesome. And in my head, I said I was like, he's the hero. Let him
Mhm.
be the hero here, and not the hero as in like he's saved the day, but the
Mhm.
hero in his own world, and that he can do that. And
Yeah.
um, it was amazing. It was
Mhm.
truly amazing, and so I get to see, and I really believe this. This is where I'm going to turn it back to you. Is uh, as I get to have better relationship with my own imps,
Mhm.
rather than them being obstacles, they can actually be on my side. They can be supportive,
Mhm.
and that's hard work. That's a lot of the work that I do internally myself, what I help guys with. But it's this sense of, you know, they're not there just to screw us over.
Mhm.
Most of the imps, I would say all, but all of the imps that I've met over the years in my career, if I could interview, and I've interviewed imps, most, if not all of them, say, I don't get it. Like, I'm just here trying to help this dude.
Mhm.
And yet the dude, me, experiences it as, trying to get in my way, trying to, get, be there as obstacles, really.
Mhm.
And so the idea of developing and really deepening my own relationship with my imps means that maybe I have more people sitting at the table with me
Mhm.
as I move through the home family foundation adventures. So
Yeah.
I would turn that. I know you and I have talked a little bit about monsters.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious in the way I was describing that, what that brings to mind for you in terms of your own vision with that.
Yeah. So I'm catching up because I had a different sense of how you meant imps, but now I see it's not as much that you look at the imps as a projection, although it could be seen as we
Yeah,
project our imps onto our kids, and therefore they become the thing we are in distaste towards in ourselves. Uh, but even more so to use the imp within us to cultivate that relationship. And I hear you saying the imp is the part that, uh, if we're out of relation with, can cause disconnection within our family between ourselves and them.
absolutely.
And now I forgot your question. So you were so
Well,
tell
I
me.
was, it was a sneaky way of saying I want to know more about your concept of monsters and how it
Yeah.
might relate, because we've
Okay.
talked about that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So the way I'm holding monsters right now, I've been using this term monster empathy, and it's multifaceted. So I'll go back to in answer to the hero's journey. There was a woman, and I forget her name, but she wrote a book called The Virgin's Promise, and it
Mm,
was another way of seeing an arc of change through the lens of a different kind of win, let's say. So if the hero's journey win is conquer over, the win in the Virgin's Promise is healing for all those involved. That's an easy, quick way to say it. So that includes the monster. So the monster in a Virgin's Promise storyline um, appears first as a monster, but then the hero is the one who finds a way to get close to the monster and heal it such that it can be integrated back into the community. And as
mm,
a father, like I didn't know about this until I saw Moana, the movie, which I've told you I love. It's like such a meaningful movie
yes.
to me, and without spoiling it, it follows that um, arc of change. The hero is
Mm,
the one who allows the monster to be integrated back into the community. Same with Encanto. My kids are young, so I'm watching all these great films. Um,
they're awesome.
so what's that?
They're great. I love both of those.
Yeah, they're amazing. Um, So yeah, to the point of monsters in this context, there are times when I see my kids as a monster, and it helps me to have this framework, at least somewhere within me, even if I can't call on it in the moment, that I understand eventually when my nervous system has calmed down that these are beings who are acting out to get attention for the healing they need. And
Mm,
the same could be said of our inner parts, I suppose. The imp might be seen as acting out until I bring my awareness and the attention it needs. But I similarly see that the monster that's emerging, it's all depending on who's telling the story, which one is the monster. So if there's a fight, you could have one person say it's the other person and vice versa. So I'm sure my kids experience me as a monster, which is on some level
mm,
super sad to me that I could be that. And I've, experienced my parents as monsters in moments in my childhood. And it's understandable. I'm bigger than they are. I can get loud and I can lose my patience. I can lose my connection with them. And suddenly I'm in a threatening position. And it goes against so many of my values that for sure I'm becoming a monster in their eyes. And to what degree, as a practice, can I allow to see myself in those moments as close as possible to the moments that I've become the monster, and that my distaste for monstrous behavior in general is in part a disgust for anger as it emerges in me. And
mm,
that's when I start to become a monster. It's not that anger is bad, but when it emerges in me, because I'm still healing my relation to that emotion, I start to lose my center and I can become a monster.
mm.
Um, yeah, so I want to pass this back to you as what in that do you relate to, and what's the nuance of that that you feel is true for you?
Well, the thing, the the piece, both of my kids have, my younger one more so, have, my younger son has really internalized sort of apologizing for
Mm,
things. And at one point, he's 13 and we're having conversations about inner worlds and things more and more.
mm,
But I did ask him, I said, and this wasn't the most insightful, wonderful question. I thought it was at the time, but more for an adult, not a 13-year-old. But I said, like, as a dad, have I really made you feel like anything you do, you have to apologize for? And
mm,
and that feels monstrous because never would I want that. In the same way of like, to make him feel that he's not as adventurous as I am, right?
mhm,
And so it really, like, that resonates in the sense of like the times that I was more harsh than I should have been,
mm,
or he did, or like you said, you're bigger, you're louder, like when I am more curt or corrective or directive in a way that I didn't feel, or I in retrospect or upon reflection feel like, ooh, that wasn't really the message I was looking to give. And
mm,
then I see it down the line where he, this isn't a good example, but like he spills something. He goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I'm like,
mhm,
we don't care if you spill things. Like that's never been anything that I've yelled at. But
mm,
the internal world has generalized such
mm,
that, he does something that he sees as wrong and then feels like and we're not physical. We don't yell like we're like, but there are times when, to use your language, like I am 100%, I have been monstrous.
mm,
And I am grateful, going back to so the language you used earlier on like the home-based foundational adventures. I am grateful that, as a father, I've committed to that, because at 13 I'm having conversations with him
mm,
that are part of the process, that are part of the journey, right? And so, um, the idea that we are all evolving in our monsters, with our monsters. You mentioned it's not about anger, but your relationship to anger, right?
mhm,
Um, that evolution is such a journey, and there's a path. And we're not going to be perfect. Our kids are going to have their own stuff to deal with because of our own journeys, but I accept that as being part of humanity, right?
mm,
And it's a gift, right? We are able to grow. I hope that, I as I make mistakes, as I encounter my monsters, as I learn about my own imps, I have more of an opportunity to give good to the world and to give good to myself, right?
mhm,
And so, yeah, I think about it, and I'm curious in terms of what you imagine that journey of anger could look like, right?
mm.
Right? Because you're saying it's not about the anger, but I don't really like the anger, and I don't,
Yeah,
and so it's not getting rid of anger, is it?
right. Yeah, for me, that's where, like, I know intellectually, and I can't say I know it fully because I'm still learning this in my body, but say I know intellectually that anger is an energy, and then I have a feeling about that energy.
Mm,
And so I think a vision to me is that energy can be used in any direction I choose. So, an ideal state for me is that the energy of anger arises and I make a choice consciously with what to do with that energy. And because of my history, my common response is repress.
mm,
And I don't think that's always the right way. Another way is like, random example, as I've spoken about a little bit, is play energy. In the midst of feeling anger, I could go to, and I have with my kids at times, go into play mode where there's an
mm,
absurdity. It's a redirection of the energy. It doesn't make the anger wrong by any means. It's like something's wrong here. I need to change something because it's not working. And can anger then be in service to that from a place of respect, from a place of um, not getting stuck in the narrative of the other as the monster.
Yes. That makes me think, we've chatted a little about archetypes today and previously, and I've told you the archetype I like to work with the most is the trickster.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of metabolizing anger into play is very much trickster energy, right? And that idea of being able to move and speak truth to power in a playful enough way that the king doesn't cut off your head.
Right. Yeah. So thank you for that. Do you have an example that you'd be willing to share in a family context where you've used or you've found yourself in trickster energy?
Mm. Fairly typically, I'll say that I will have one, but the first one that comes to mind is the example that I didn't have that. And so unfortunately, like, um every year we have a big New Year's sort of ritual routine, and we have gathering, and my family, we all get together and talk about kind of what's something we want to invite in for the year, and pick a
Mm,
word, these kind of things. And this past year I said playfulness,
mm,
and it came without thinking, without really much reflection. And then I reflected on the fact that, like, people who have known me for years know that I'm really playful. I'm silly to a fault sometimes, and all
mm,
of that. And I realized that, at least recently in a lot of my parenting in my home life, I had not been.
mm,
And to the point where, my wife, in her wisdom, has said, when my kids get anxious, or when my kids get, you know, however kids get, has told me, be more playful around them.
mm.
Respond, you can joke. And that gets a little bit of my ego involved, because of course I know that, right? And so I have invited more trickster energy this year, because it actually, in the recent past, has been sort of missing, or not as present as I'd like.
Mm,
Um, but that being said, I think that for me, the trickster energy that comes to mind is often in the evening times. I get very playful and silly, and we have a lot to do, right? So when it comes to making dinner, putting away dinner, getting things done, it's very easy, especially because I have older kids. It's very easy to get into the thing of, do your part. Come on, you can put away dishes. And it's very
yeah.
easy to do that. Um, and it's a lighter example, but I think the place that I really love is, let's put on some music.
Yeah.
Let's be silly. Let's figure out what we can do. And my kids hearing this will say I don't do that enough, and they're right.
Mm,
But to me, it is, how do we invite others into playfulness, and into, not just playfulness, because the trickster is much more than that, right? Like, the
mm,
trickster is really about, how do we both take real responsibility and discernment over choices,
mm.
and still do kind of, even if it means that it's not the popular, or the thing that everyone likes, do the thing that's needed, right?
Yeah.
And if you can do it with a lightness and a playfulness, wonderful.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me of I heard someone, and I don't know the name, say that one of the ways to get into that space of playfulness in a family setting is to pretend, like, I'm going to imagine we're on vacation right now, even though we're still in our house. If I were on
Mm.
vacation in this moment, how would I do this moment? And for sure, like, we bring a speaker with us for music anytime we go stay somewhere else.
Yeah.
And there's just more like readiness to celebrate or have fun when in the vacation context is there. And I continue to want, I have a similar thing where if I'll call it a need for me to bring more of my natural playfulness into the context of the home. Um, and music is great. It's such a great avenue. It helps me so much. Um, Playful wrestling can be a great way for me too, to allow, like, if we feel some conflict, let's push on each other physically and let that be something we can be laughing about. Um, It's also interesting to me. I think it was Warren Farrell. He wrote a book recently about boys and fathers, and he made this point that really landed well with me, which is like one of the gifts of fathers playing that role of like wrestling, for example, isn't that it's like a dangerous thing and that you get to be risky with dad. Like, yes, there's that. But what happens is when the kids go too far, it's when the dad says that's too far. Like we're gonna play in this space, but you can't bite me. I'm not gonna
Mhm.
play with you if you bite me. So that is the more important part of that playful space. Like the father can bring that learning. And I love that possibility. Like I do feel I want to be a teacher as I can model as best as I can. But like from that place of play, there's so much more power there for me.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. I mean, that's the power. I love that. And well, people can hear and experience more experientially through play than they can through directional discipline,
Mm,
all of these things. And so you can learn so much, right? Like, I mean, we think about some of the great interventions of working with parents around like, well, let's put a timer and say, how fast can you clean up? And
yeah.
that's a game, right? And all of these things can be gained. And as adults, we love that too, right?
Yeah.
Um, and if we look at things like a game, it doesn't mean we don't take them seriously. In
Mm,
fact, we maybe take them more seriously. But
yeah.
it doesn't have to be drudgery or, I mean, let's get dirty. Let's get in the muck. And it's
Mm,
hard. Sometimes we're going to get bit. But
yeah.
like using that example to go even more so is how you say you cannot bite me, how
Mm.
you put that boundary is also an amazing learning.
Yeah. Say more about that.
Well, I mean, someone you're wrestling with a kid and the kid bites you and you smack their face off the arm.
Mm,
That's saying you cannot bite me. I'm not going to
mm,
wrestle with you if you bite me, but it's saying it in a very different way than if you stop and you explain why and at the developmental level of the
yeah.
kid that you're speaking with. But, you know, are you doing it? Like, think of the message. If you're wrestling and being silly and laughing, and then all of a sudden you get stern and say, don't do this, right? There's uh, um, an inconsistency there.
Mm,
There's a story there that, since we're not giving language to, the kids will create that
hmm.
story themselves.
Yeah.
And that story, and specifically that story, more often than not, might mean that being playful isn't so safe.
Yeah.
Because if I create a boundary,
Mm,
I might get yelled at or whatever.
yeah. And then a message like, I'm bad. I did a bad thing. I should have known. Dad knows. I should have known. Yeah,
Exactly.
there's a middle ground to me there of I find when it works well for me, I don't tend to stop and sit them down, but I'm in the middle where I'm playing and it's like, oh, can't do it. Oh, oh, watch out. Oh, can't bite. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
it's a reminder, but it's not as stern. It's very, I hope it's clear and it does
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
because they know like the
Absolutely.
play is gonna end if I can't follow the safety rules.
Yes, and those expectations. These are things that so many times a game is a metaphor for an issue or a thing that
Mm,
we deal with all the time. And so, how do we develop that both naturally and intentionally at the same time? As I mean, I think for me, in our fatherhood journeys, that's a big task. Is how do we allow spontaneous, natural play to evolve and also be intentional about how we present it.
yeah. Were you just saying there was something you just said about like it kind of stands for something. The play stands for something else. Can you say more about
Mhm.
that?
Sure. I'm a big believer, fan of, user of metaphor.
Hmm.
And metaphor, we all learned in school, like the difference between a metaphor and a simile. Simile uses like and as, and a metaphor does not.
Mm.
We go deeper a little bit, at least the way I think about it, and my English teacher, might not agree, but a simile is more explicit. This is going to be a description about how two things are to be compared. A metaphor is implicit. the structures of the activity, the way that we engage with one another, the tools that are used can be compared or connected to the other experience in life that we have.
Can
In some of the training that
can
I
I define it for a second for
yeah,
myself and maybe listeners
please do.
who are
Yeah,
not English majors like I was? Um, the simile would be like he jumped like a frog. Is that fair? Okay, and then the
yeah,
metaphor would be like he became a frog and started jumping.
yeah. His frog like yeah. I'm not going to improve on that.
Okay,
Yes, he became a
okay,
frog, right?
okay,
And
please.
yeah, so that's exactly it. And so when you have an experience, whether you're wrestling or playing a game or throwing tag or whatever, those experiences are learning moments. They're intentional or otherwise because they're a part of who we are. They become part of our story. And so, similarly in a negative sense, like I said, when I was too impatient with anxiety,
Mm,
during a moment, that translated to I'm sorry I'm not adventurous enough like
mm,
you, right? Playfulness happens on the other way as well, right? So when I get physical with both of my kids, are very physical, they're very athletic, and I'm very playful physically with them. Well, they also then know, you know, easy low hanging fruits to that are they know I have a lot of balance. They have balance. They have poise and agility. They have all these things, and then
mm,
that can sort of exist in other areas of their lives in a
mm.
powerful way,
Yeah.
explicitly or not.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say about physicality. I had an amazing martial arts teacher named Matt Lucas who was in the Bay Area when I worked with him, and I didn't learn martial arts per se. I learned how to build the body of a martial artist. So it was a health
Mhm.
choice to learn about these moves. And one of the things he said was that um, fighting is a form of intimacy. In other
Mhm.
words, when you if you live in a city and you don't have body contact and suddenly you brush up against someone, it's like immediate conflict versus if you're in a playful state with someone where you have body contact, then you know it's safe to have a brush up and it doesn't have to be a conflict. So like in the home, like be having a story around like, oh, I have these physical brush ups, or they are the metaphor for I have brush ups in relationship. And this is, I know the energy of moving through that towards a resolution where everyone's still okay all the way through.
Beautiful, like that, yes. And so that is the development of a lived metaphor that
Mm.
becomes really powerful. Which I'm curious, what style of martial art, by the way?
He would say many different things. It was a Persian style, but then he mixed in yoga and other things for health conditioning.
Oh, that's I don't know if we talked about that. We have to. I studied capoeira for many years,
Oh, right on. Yeah.
and very. Before that, I studied Okinawan karate, two different forms. And when I
Mm.
discovered capoeira, I fell in love, and really, it was metaphor in motion. It was this
Yeah.
idea
That's
of
the dancing style.
yes, and it's just so interesting because the dance was the metaphor. The dance it was hidden within the dance, and um, I used to joke and say it's the social worker's martial art because and it was the trickster's martial art, right? There was never you don't bow if you go to bow with someone and they bow back, you might hit them in the head, right?
Oh.
Because it's about it was so playful. In fact, they never called it sparring or
Oh.
fighting. It's called playing,
Yep.
jogando. And this idea was that it was developed in the slave communities in Brazil. And, so you have a community that is literally the most oppressive state that humans can have in
Mm.
one another. And yet they played. And so this idea of freedom through playing, strength building and safety and freedom through playing, all of this was done with music and hidden within dance. And if you look, there are two main forms. I did a more traditional, older form called Angola, and it doesn't look as flashy and dancey as the more modern ones,
Mm.
but it did have this rhythm. You never did it without music. You
Mm.
never did it without um, sort of this playful, like built into the game. They were called games.
Mm.
Built into the game was tricksterism.
Mm.
I'm going to forget the word now, so it doesn't matter. But the idea was really that, you know, you developed both your body and all of your own parts to be able to be, free in whatever situation you could be in, and
Mm.
be playful and engage in ways that kept you safe, both inner
Yeah.
and out. So yeah, we
Mm.
should definitely be talking more about some of that. I'd love to hear more of what you did too.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. I mean, if I draw a line from that practice, which was years before I was a father and fatherhood, there is, hmm, yeah, I mean, I wrestled in high school and middle school. Oh, you too.
Me
Okay.
too. Yeah.
So that I think set me up well for, like, I'm very comfortable rolling around on the floor with my kids. It is such a healthy choice. Like, if for anyone who's seen, there's a Netflix series about blue ocean communities or blue something communities. I can't remember the term, but it's about people who live over 100 years old. And one of the things is like comfort with the floor. So people who sit on the floor instead of a chair, their bodies are already in a place where they have to get all the way up from the floor, which builds muscle. And then they're also using stretching as they're sitting on the floor in different ways so that a person, an older person who falls, that's one of like the riskiest things. But if you're spending so much time on the floor, it reduces that risk between the muscle building and the stretching.
Oh, that's cool.
Um, so yeah, why did I say that? That's a huge tangent there. What
Wrestling.
wrestling? Yeah, so I'm comfortable on the floor with my kids, and it's a it's one of those like, as a father, I have, I'm just an adult, so I have more strength than them, but I also have leverage, and I can do little things with them where I knock them over with my finger. And it's fun because I feel a power trip in it, but I'm doing it, I'm holding way back. Like, I think there's probably examples of animals who do this, where it's like the parent will play with the maybe lion and the cub, with like obviously the lion could kill the cub, but they're holding back completely. There's a real control, and it's a teaching. Um,
Mm.
Otherwise, I mean, I will say my teacher, Matt Lucas, to his credit, he was super playful. He like funny, goofy guy. And I really appreciated that energy in that space because of my own upbringing of a certain fear of conflict, and
Yeah.
how that mix of playfulness in that space is like, it's such an antidote to going overboard with a really unhealthy violence.
Yes. That's yeah. And I think to I now want to look up this guy, but to that story is, yeah, as you are able to get more grounded in your own self and do your own work, right? Being more playful, you always think, I joke about the Karate Kid kind of thing, and I
Hmm.
fell in love with that as a kid. And I remember, I forget which scene, but when Mr. Miyagi had finally taken down his opponent, went to give the final punch and then stopped and squeezed him in the nose and went,
Yeah.
eh, you
Yeah.
know,
Honk.
yeah, like that, we don't have to have power over in
Yeah.
order to be masculine, in order to be strong, in order
Mm.
to, we don't need to dominate,
Yeah.
but we have to know ourselves well enough that we're not going, I think a lot of parents, going back to wrestling with their kids and the biting and whatnot, I think a lot of fathers, myself included, I'm sure you at times, when we overreact or we react when a kid bites or does something,
Mm.
that's our own past stuff
Mm.
getting in the way. Whereas, maybe a teacher like Matt Lucas, or one of my teachers, or one of the capoeira teachers that I had, you know, not to put them on pedestals because I know they've done the work, but maybe, if their kid bit them, they would be like, hey, I'm not food,
Right.
or
Yeah.
whatnot,
It's
just to
not
be able to
personal.
say, yeah. And, you know, I've gotten better at it over time, but
Mm.
it certainly is a bigger part of my journey more and more as I become aware of
Yeah. No, that's a good, I'm going to use that line. I'm not food.
it.
I don't ever want to be food.
Yes, exactly.
Not to
On
my
lots of
kids.
levels.
Um, how to close this out? Because I want to respect our time, and also like I feel like we've come through a nice like wave of exploration. Um, I'm gonna just read the statement from before to see if there's any nuance that you want to add before we close. So we
Mm,
were talking about foundational fatherhood adventures, how a masculine journey can be experienced not out there, but within the family, and how the hero's journey as a framework can evolve to meet the reality of fatherhood and the deeper needs of human beings. So
mm.
first, I could imagine a part two one day, but is in terms of today, what might we want to say to leave people with?
Well, definitely, let's do a part two.
Yeah.
But I think as you read that, I think the piece that I just want to kind of highlight is, you know, we are as men. There are social stories. There are people. There's not just socialization, but like the whispers of culture
Mm,
that really teach men how to be.
mm,
And in the last, I don't know, many years, many of those stories have been only partial. They haven't been complete.
mm,
And as a result, we look at might makes right. The leaders make this write the stories. We have this domination or power over, and that's been confused with what men's real inner drives are, which they're
mm,
not, right?
mm,
The idea that it's almost trite to say, but it's still very true in our culture that men are taught to not cry, boys are told
mm,
not to emote, and as a result, fathers, sons are hurting.
mm,
We're hurting others, we're hurting ourselves at higher rates than ever before,
yeah.
and we have more of a story to live and to learn from. And that,
Mm,
to me, that's where we can move beyond the heroes, and that's where the hero's journey can evolve. And so there's so much around connection and partnership. But in short, the idea that you know men or boys don't need loving, emotional, expressive relationships in the way that
mm,
girls do, or
mm,
anywhere in between, anyone does, is painful and hurting. And
mm,
the metaphor I often give, I'll sort of end and pause with this, is, if we, and I may have said this our first time, so forgive me, but if we took a plant and put it in a dark room with no windows or sunlight and didn't water it, and then somehow the plant will withers and starts to die, and we said, oh my gosh, there's a problem with the plants,
mm,
right? There's a health problem, there's a crisis with the plants.
mm,
And to continue that metaphor, like, we would have to develop expensive fertilizers to get the plant to work, and we'd have
mm,
to hire people to come in and talk to the plants and make sure they're okay, but they're not getting sunlight, and they're not
mm,
getting water, and they're not getting nutrients. And if we took the plants outside and gave them what they really needed, they might thrive.
mm.
And I think that as men, and for fathers and sons, and frankly every,
Yeah.
um, we need to deepen the stories of how we become who we
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I hear a reclaiming of lost, uh, there's lost story, reclaiming of lost aspects of self in opposition to a dominant culture whisper. The whispers of culture, that's a beautiful phrase. Um, I'm just going to thank you for that, Jason, and thank you for this conversation. It's been awesome. We'll do a part two sometime. Um,
are. I would love that.
but thank you for sharing your voice with us today.
Oh, and thank you, Matthew. Really, when we first met, even on text or emails, I said, "Oh, we're gonna have stuff here,"
Yeah.
and for this conversation in general, and also, as I said in the beginning, where I'm located right now, there's nothing that could have helped me get grounded and back home than talking
Mm,
about this with you. So I really, on a lot of levels, really appreciate it.
mm.
Yeah.
Thank you for that reflection.